Alright, for your discussion board for this particular chapter, I'm going to ask you a question about dignity and refinement. That is in reference to the, at least in my book, it's on page 115, where they're talking about how life nowadays has a greater dignity than before. There are more songs, more speeches, more processions. I want you to consider what actually gives life dignity. You might want to look up the word dignity. You might even want to look up the word refinement so that you know kind of what that's referring to and what true dignity is compared to false dignity and true refinement compared to false refinement. I think the easiest way to consider this, really to start off with if you don't have any ideas, is the idea of clothing. I know that for me, for example, I find it very important that if I'm going to go to a theatrical event, or if I'm going to go to an orchestra concert, something that is typically very formal, I never go in jeans. And if I'm taking students with me, I tell them not to wear jeans, because I think it's important to show respect to the occasion. However, I wouldn't do that if I was gardening. I definitely wouldn't wear the same clothes. So I think, for me at least, there's something that you might want to consider in terms of external and internal motivation, because at the same time I think you would also agree that a person who wears really expensive clothing just to get attention is probably not as dignified or refined as a person who wears really expensive clothing because they can afford to and because they like the quality and because they aren't seeking attention but just want to look nice. So think about the different facets of it. I would advise you not to go just for the cheap answers, particularly where clothing and appearance is involved, because I think it would be very very petty of you to say that trying to look nice is always bad. Remember, you want to avoid those generalities. Be very careful with those. The other thing I want to talk with you about is the idea of Boxer and what Boxer represents. Boxer as a character meets a pretty horrible demise in the end because his motto is that he will always work harder. Now, working hard is in and of itself not a bad thing. I think that, considering that most of you come from the state of Utah, we're the beehive state, work is something that we greatly value as a culture. But you do have to be careful, I think, to not get confused with work that is actually profitable and benefiting you, and work that is not really work but gives you the illusion of work. For example, those of you who play video games might get a false sense of achievement of completing the next level or obtaining the next amount of treasure that you need to get, or whatever. I don't really play video games, so I don't really know. But the different levels that you can progress through in a video game can give you a false sense of achievement and success. Now, I don't think video games are in and of themselves bad, but if that becomes your day, and if all you're doing is getting this achievement through a video game, what have you actually accomplished? When you turn off the game and step away from it, what have you really done? Now, the same thing can be said for example, reading a book that doesn't actually do anything for your mind. It doesn't actually stimulate your thought process. Is reading in and of itself a good thing to do? Or does it have to be something that makes you think? Or is there a time and a place for video games and books that are fluffy, and a time and a place for things that actually require a little bit more thought and a little bit more physical exertion or mental capability? Aristotle talks about that. If you've taken the Ancient World class, or if you will take the Ancient World class, then you'll hear a little bit more about that idea later. But consider the idea of work. Boxer, I think, starts off with very good intentions. He wants to work hard for the benefit of the farm, but eventually, even when he starts knowing that the government that the pigs are forming is not doing good things, he gets distracted by this idea of working harder and working harder and working harder and thinking that's going to fix the situation, but it really doesn't. And the work that he pursues ends up not really being beneficial for him or for anybody else, because he's not really working at anything that's going to get anybody a reward that's worth having. So take a look at your own life and consider for yourself, what am I doing right now with my time that is work that's actually beneficial and getting me towards my goals, and what's the work that I'm doing that gives me the feeling like I've accomplished something great but really isn't actually accomplishing anything.